Next speaker is Brian Cummins. He's an NI and he's been around BSAC for 35 years, is it? Or a bit higher? 5 years, okay. He's actually the incident advisor and he's been doing it for about 22 years. So he's very experienced at this. So Brian does a really important job. The incident report is very important to BSAC. We actually can learn from it and we can make diving our sport a lot safer. So it's a really important element of what Brian does. So over to you, Brian. Okay.
Thank you very much, and hello. I'll start. They always say never start with an apology, but I'm going to. Last year, those of you that were here may remember that I announced that I thought it was time after 20 odd years that there was some fresh blood, and that Claire Petty, who had been helping me in the background, was going to be taking over this role. Now, sadly, Claire has got some pretty serious issues to deal with at the moment, so was unable to do this. I'm afraid you're stuck with me again until things change. Now you're embarrassing me. Okay, so the 2016 incident report, and while I'm on the subject of that, I'd like to record a great thanks to Jim Watson. Jim jumped up or stepped in and spent almost the last week with me pulling all these data together, producing this report. So although I'm presenting it, a lot of the work behind the scenes is down to Jim as well. And beavering away in the background, Lizzie Bird, who's done an awful lot of the coding, the transcribing of the synopses. So when you get the actual report itself, which should be published somewhere towards the end of the month, you'll read a lot of the work that Lizzie has done. So that's the thanks to them out the way. This is pretty much standard format. We're going to look at the statistics. I'm going to comment on some of the issues that come out of those statistics, the unusual events, things that have caught my eye during the year, and then wind up with some conclusions, and then we move into some awards. So just to remind you, the incident year has done for many years, largely because of the timing of this conference, runs from the 1st of October, so this incident year was 1st of October last year, all the way through to the end of September. And as you can see, it's pretty tight because here we are, not even at the end of October, and we've managed to pull all those numbers together and generate a report. It's really quite an intense effort. But this year, 271 incidents have been entered into the database. 228 of those are UK-based, and that's any diver, whatever qualification, whatever agency, involved in sports diving. That's in that 228, and then 43 members or incidents from overseas, and that involves our members. Any incident that occurs overseas that involves our member in any way gets into the report. Those are the only overseas incidents that we deal with. So looking at the numbers of reported incidents, this goes way back to 1991, if you can't read the numbers, and what we saw was this progressive climb from something around 150 all the way up to just under 400 during the latter part of the last century. And then in the noughties, it kind of leveled off around about 390 incidents a year. These are the UK incidents. And then at the beginning of this decade, we started to see a decline, and it dropped down. And then over the last couple of years, I wondered if we were getting a dwell, and it now looks quite likely that what's happening, it's leveling out. So we've seen possibly a 40% drop of reported incidents against the background that we had been used to over the previous sort of beginning of the century and so forth. So it's worth bearing that in mind when looking at the other data, because there's been an overall drop. So you would expect to see individual categories fallen, which of course they have. The question this raises is there's three explanations for this. Either there's suddenly a lot less incidents, or there's progressively less incidents, and I hope that's true, and you guys are putting an awful lot of effort into trying to achieve that, so I think there's an element of that in there. Maybe there's less diving taking place. I also think that's true, and some of the apocryphal information that you hear from dive sites and operators and things suggests that that's actually true. The other explanation potentially is there's the same amount of diving going on, there's the same amount of incidents taking place, we're just not hearing about it. And I think that's not true, and I will explain to you why I think that's the case. So I think we're looking at less diving, and I hope we're looking at improved diving safety. We categorise the incidents into 7 main categories to start with. There's an awful lot of other analysis that goes on, but there's 7 main categories. And the first of those, fortunately one of the smallest, is the fatalities, but it clearly is the most important. And what I've shown here is in each one of these, the yellow bar is where we are this year, and these others are each previous year. So it goes back, in each case, goes back sort of 18, 19 years. So you can quickly compare what's been happening to that. And what you can see, the fatalities on the highlighted there, as I will be discussing much more a few slides on, there's been 11 this year. 11 is slightly below the average, but that's where we are. I'll talk more about that in a minute. DCI was dropping. Seems to have kicked up a bit this year, but again, I'll look at more detail of that later on and we'll see whether that's really true or not. Boat and surface, there's 2 major issues here. One is boat and engine problems, and the other one is lost divers. They're, for historical reasons, they're rolled into one lump, and you can see that also shows a declining picture, quite a dramatic declining picture over recent years, possibly now kind of levelling off a bit. Again, more about that in the future. Ascents rose to a peak, worryingly. Then it started falling back again, and again it's kind of levelling off, I think, at a much lower number than we have seen. And again, there's been a lot of work done on this. We highlighted the issue of poor ascents some time back. You people in this room have put an awful lot of effort into Ascent training people how to do this thing properly, and I hope that you're seeing the results of some of that there. Lastly, the category that I highlight here is illness, and this is general illness, divers not feeling well. A lot of it, I think, is hidden DCI, because the data that we get from the RNLI often doesn't say DCI, it says diver ill, so we don't know, but there's more DCI probably hidden amongst that. So, looking at the distribution of incidents by month, so we're starting out October all the way through to September, that being our incident year. And again, the same device is used here. These are previous years, and these brighter coloured bars are the number for this year. And the thing that I highlighted a couple of years ago, and still is true here, that you can see particularly in this April data here, that there were some big numbers. This is the beginning of the diving season, and very recently this has fallen back, and that characteristic has been sustained, and some of the other numbers here are significantly lower than they have been. And to try and clarify that picture, I've done some averaging of these data, and this chart here looks at an average of the incidents by month from 1998 all the way through to 2013. And it follows a sort of classical, almost sine wave form, which is what you'd anticipate, because in the winter months there's less diving going on, it steps up as the summer approaches, peaks over the summer and so forth. And that's the picture we had grown used to seeing. In 2013, there was a particularly bad winter. That's when we had snow all the way through to March, all sorts of things. And not surprisingly, that depressed the amount of diving taking place that year. 14, 15, and this year, that picture didn't arise. Also, the weather picture didn't arise. We didn't have a particularly bad winter. However, this is what I noticed in 2014. This was 2015, and this is 2016. So I think what we are highlighting here is a dramatic change. Either people got hugely safer in that time of year, which I frankly don't believe, or the pattern of diving in the UK has changed, and I think that's clearly what's happening here. If it had just been a general reduction in everything, you'd see the same form, but just depressed. Here, there's a very clear deficit, in the amount of dives taking place, and thus the number of incidents occurring in sort of March, April, May, June. And it's worth bearing that in mind as we look at when some of the serious incidents have occurred. So point one, there's been this change in the way people are diving. They're leaving their diving till later on in the year. Coastguard assistance. Coastguard get involved when divers have serious problems, when they get lost, when they've got DCI, need to be taken to chambers and so forth. And there have been 94 incidents reported this year involving the Coastguard, and you can see the pattern, the distribution, and that's pretty much following the other characteristic that I showed you earlier. The next slide looks at the numbers against time, so it starts out in 1998 all the way through to current. And again, it shows the picture that I showed overall incidents, that we had a typical 200 reports a year from the Coastguard. Beginning of the 10s, it started to fall, and I think, again, we've seen this levelling out now of incidents involving the Coastguard. A similar picture with helicopter involvement. Again, helicopters get involved when divers are lost or divers need a trip to a chamber. 60 incidents reported, maybe slightly odd in April there, but these are low numbers. You're only looking at 6 there anyway. But the same sort of pattern. Looking at it over time, this is the number of helicopter incidents or incidents involving helicopters going back in time, and it was showing a rise to around about the middle of the noughties. Then it levelled off, then it started to decline. It's the same picture, I think, and perhaps now levelling off again. Similarly with the RNLI, these are the incidents involved the lifeboats, lost divers, diver with DCI, divers with other problems, needing lifeboat assistance. Same picture. It's what you would expect to see. There were 58 incidents reported by the RNLI. Thanks to them, and indeed thanks to the Coastguard. We have very good links with both, and we're grateful for the information that flows in from those people. Looking at the history of the RNLI, it was possibly a slight decline up until fairly recent, and then we saw this same picture of this relatively steep decline, and again, perhaps now a plateauing of there you go, of RNLI cases. The next slide looks at the depths involved, and they're grouped. First, the biggest group is unknown because quite often in the incident reports that information is not available. Some instances occur at the surface, and this is the deepest depth of the dive. So some incidents are only involving divers who were at the surface and never got any deeper than that. And then you can see the categorizations that go up in 10-meter increments. And I would highlight these at the end here. There's 3 incidents reported that involve a dive to greater than 50 meters. One of those was a fatality. It was a 55-meter dive. The point I guess I'm trying to make is that in the past there have been quite a few incidents involved here. There's now only 3 this year. These very often are serious incidents, you know, for obvious reasons: greater depth, greater ceiling over your head risk, and so on and so forth. 1 out of 3 was a fatality. So. This next chart looks at where the incident actually started. Again, a lot of them we don't know, but the next biggest bunch of these surface incidents, and this is it's one of 2 things. It's divers that have come up, everything's fine, and then they've developed DCI, or they've got lost at the surface, and that's what those are. And the rest of it is just a declining pattern, as you might expect. So I want to move on and look at the fatalities, go into a little bit more detail of that. As I said, this year there are 11 fatalities involving UK divers of any affiliation, and the rolling average of the previous 10 years is 13.7. The BSAC membership, there were 5 of those 11 were our members, and the 10-year rolling average for that is 6, so slightly below, but these are mercifully small numbers. The non-membership fatalities, there were 6, and again, the 10-year rolling average for that is 7.7, so slightly below. And then there were 2 overseas fatalities, and unfortunately both of those were our members. So looking at just to put that perhaps in a bit more perspective, looking at the history going way back, this looks at the number of BSAC fatalities all the way back to 1987, all the way up to, it is 2016 on the end there, but it doesn't show it, and you can blame Bill Gates for that. But you can see that this is, sadly, not an abnormal year. And similarly for the non-BSAC fatalities, a similar picture, 6 there, and looking back in time, certainly in recent years, that's round about what one might expect. The next chart looks at the distribution of the UK fatalities by month, tiny numbers, but 1 in February, 1 in March, 1 in April and so forth, 2 in May. You can read it yourself. The point that I would make here, just remember back to the distribution of incidents versus month that I showed you earlier, and I showed you that it was depressed in April, May, June, July and so forth, which is what we've seen in the past. Here you've got something like 5 fatalities, almost half of the fatalities have occurred in that period when there was a depressed amount of incidents being reported. And the potential conclusion from that is, of course, that there's more risk earlier on in the season, which I think we intuitively know, but if you want some kind of loose evidence for it, it's here. And the message there is obviously take it easy when you start your diving season again and so forth. So perhaps an important message to take away. The next few slides look at some of the reasons behind these. You've seen this, if you've been here before, you've seen this sort of approach before, but this is going to build into columns, and each of the columns represents one incident. There will be 11 columns across the top there. It shows the 5 that were our members and then the 6 that were non-members. And the first thing to say, and it's not unusual, is that in virtually all of those cases, we actually don't have sufficient information to enable us to draw a totally conclusive understanding of what went on. Very often we do get more information because the coroner's courts take place and we get feedback from that, often attend those events. So more information does flow in and that gets put into the database and is used for future learning, but obviously not available right now. So big number there, we can't be certain. The next is looking at medical, and this has been highlighted many times when we've been through here. Medical in this sense means some event like a heart attack or a stroke or something of that nature which has happened during the dive. And unusually, all but 2 of these, we put a question mark in. And I want to talk a bit more about that in a minute, but there's becoming a growing awareness that there is a potentially serious medical issue here that we need to be particularly aware of, and I will talk about that a bit more in the future. Diver separation. 7 cases involved divers that got separated, either as a result of the developing incident or prior to the incident occurring. 6 cases involved people falling unconscious in the water. 3 incidents involving people diving in a trio or more, so not solo, not buddy-do, not pair diving, but something more than that. And again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the root cause, but we have highlighted the issue in the past that when there is more people, there is kind of more potential for confusion and so forth, and people getting, missed out of, the buddy monitoring process. 3 cases where divers were heavy and sank, And in at least 2 of these, I'm not sure about the third, but in at least 2 of these cases, they'd actually got back to the surface, were in difficulties, and were unable to remain at the surface. Now, had they been able to take the right action, or had they taken the right action to become buoyant, then maybe the outcome would have been different. And perhaps, this has been with us since, we started diving. Keeping your buoyancy at the surface, dropping your weight belt if necessary, is all key stuff. And so, perhaps that would have helped these people. I don't know. One case of a solo diver, and if you look up, you'll see that it also is ticked as trio or more, and this is a case where someone started off with a group of divers and then elected to move off and turn it into a solo dive. That person, incidentally, was subsequently found at the surface, face down, regulator out. So again, perhaps if they hadn't been alone, the outcome might have been different. One case involved entanglement, diver entangled on the shot line, and a separation. One case was a rapid ascent, and I think the rapid ascent was a result of other things happening, because you notice we've put a question mark in the medical there. So I'm not saying the rapid ascent brought on the medical. I think it's more likely the other way around, that the medical issue brought on the rapid ascent. One case involved equipment. It was a blown O-ring, and that resulted in out-of-air situation. Pulmonary barotrauma as a result of the rapid ascent. But as I said a few minutes ago, I'm not saying it was a rapid ascent that caused this. Could have been a resultant effect of something else going on. And then lastly, looking at age, this is something that we flagged over a number of years. The average age of the fatalities this year is 52.8 years. That seems to be levelling out. It had been rising. We're getting older, folks, and it's kind of levelling off now. It can't go on forever, can it? So that's where we are. But it is, that I don't believe that's the profile of UK divers in general, and it is highlighting this issue of increasing risk with age. Go and see our friends at the RNLI, and they'll sort you out or worry you, which might be useful. I mentioned this medical issue. I'm not a medical expert by any measure of means, but if you were here a couple of years, or last year I think, maybe the year before, Pete Wilmshurst spoke about immersion pulmonary oedema. I'm going to call it IPO now. And there is a growing awareness, I think, of the potential that this can have and maybe has been having. And for those that are not aware with it, the issue here is that when you immerse yourself in water, and you don't have to be a diver, you just have, you can do it in a bath. Swimmers, distant swimmers, anyone in the water, and as I say, I'm not a medical person, I'm an engineer, but my analogy for this, if you get a plastic bag full of water and hold it up here, the water will pull the bag down. You put that plastic bag of water in water, and the weight's gone and it just diffuses out. And that's what's happening inside you when you immerse yourself in water. It results in a redistribution of the blood within the body. Normally, your body now detects an excess of fluid. It's removed through the kidneys, and that's why when you go diving, you've got this urge to go to pee. But it also increases the potential for the fluid to enter the lungs. And when the fluid enters the lungs, I guess in a way, it's a kind of form of drowning. What we do know is exacerbated by high blood pressure, and it's exacerbated by exertion, and there have been suggestions of other mechanisms like gas density, anything that increases the pressure differential across the lungs, could be, and as the learning develops, I think we'll find a lot more about this, but there could be other factors involved. The outcome is breathlessness, disorientation, unconsciousness, and so forth. This is an extract from one of the incidents that you'll be able to read in this year's report. Written by someone, well, this is a paraphrasing the report that we got. A diver started to feel she was having to suck very hard on a regulator to obtain any gas. She purged the regulator in case there was a blockage, but it made no difference. The diver was coughing frequently, and on checking her pressure gauge, found she had 140 bar remaining. So she had air, had a regulator that was functioning correctly, but felt that it wasn't. She switched to her alternative source regulator, but the problem remained. She aborted the dive, attended hospital, and was diagnosed with an IPO. Now, this person was aware of this potential condition, and by taking the action she took, probably saved her life. So there is a growing awareness of this potential problem, and if there's one message you take away from today, I hope this is it. I looked, the current database goes back 20 odd years, and one of the flags that you can tick is breathlessness, and I ticked breathlessness, hit the button, boof, 200 and odd incidents jumped straight out at me, and when I started to read through some of those, I think, yep, that sounds like it could be the same thing. So it's kind of been hidden there. This is not new. Your bodies haven't changed. This has been going on for, ever since you've been diving. But I think that's changed. I think the thing that's changed is the fact that we are now becoming more aware of this. And so what the message I would like to leave you with, if nothing else, is pay attention for the following things when you're diving, either in yourself or in your buddy. Breathlessness with no apparent reason, rapid, uneven, heavy breathing, coughing uncontrollably, confusion, belief that a regulator is malfunctioning, out of gas being indicated, but that not being the case, refusing or rejecting alternative air source, breathing difficulty when on the surface. So this, as I say, read through the reports and you'll see many cases of this being apparent. If apparent, abort the dive. Don't hesitate, because the solution to this is to get out of the water and let gravity take back, and then you do need medical care. Return to the surface as quickly as safely possible. Whilst you're underwater, if this is happening to your buddy, the condition ain't going to get better. Seek medical advice. So, something I think we need to take away and raise awareness of. Decompression illness, this is a normal picture. We had 75 cases reported in 2016, as I say, up slightly from where we have been. This is looking at the issues involved, and these are the normal sorts of things. Apparently 36% were said to be within tables and computer limits, but you talk to anyone that runs a decompression chamber and they'll tell you that divers sometimes mislead people. And you can read the rest of it. It's all stuff that you've seen before. Looking back at the history of this, yes, it had been going down. Yes, this year apparently shows a kick up, but then is it just part of this trend downwards and it just being a sort of minor perturbation? I don't know. Time will tell us. Looking forward to the boat and surface incidents, 11 cases involved engine problems, mainly engine failure. 2 cases involved boat problems, swamping of the boat. 2 cases involved bad seamanship, which classically boats too close to divers. And one of these, read it when you get the report. It was a group of divers, quite correctly, decompressing on a shot buoy when a warship went over the top of their shot buoy. And the description is, they described their chest thumping as they felt the prop wash. And those divers were in the right. It was the warship was in the wrong, and they got an apology at the end of it. Not much use if you're minced up by a propeller of a warship, but... and 21 cases of lost diver. And when you split them out, this is the boating bit. And you can see that that's been going down. This is the lost diver bit, and I think you can... what are we doing? So that's the boating problem bit. Boat and engine has been going down dramatically. So the fall in that category is largely due to the boat and engine issues. And the lost diver, a gentle decline, but bear in mind the number of amount of diving has been going down as well, I believe. Ascents, these are ascents that were not correct but didn't result in something more serious like DCI. There were 31 reported. There's certainly a lot more because people do a duff ascent and they get away with it and keep it quiet. 19 of those were rapid ascents, but with no consequence apparent. 6 were non-rapid but missed stops, and then there was a ragbag of other problems with ascents. Causal factors, you're very familiar with these: poor buoyancy control, panic. This doesn't add up to 100 because often there was more than one factor involved in the event. Looking at the history of ascents, this is kind of the picture you saw in the opening slides. Looking back over time, we had this worrying increase, which probably aligned to the increase of overall reporting, amount of diving going on, and all of the work that's been done. This has gone down dramatically, and this isn't just less diving. You can see it's gone down by more than 50%. So the work that you've been doing has been having a significant positive result, and well done for that. The more unusual, these are the things that, the first one I don't think is amusing, but it's illustrative of a point. I am a strong believer that the way to solve any problem is to avoid it in the first place. Right? So, and this, I think, I'll make a point. An instructor and student were at 13 metres. Hovering at 10 metres at the end of the dive, the student successfully inflated the DSMB, shot it up to the surface with an alternative regulator. Her hair became entangled in the reel, which jammed. The rising DSMB began to drag her to the surface. Swift reaction from the instructor resolved the situation. They made a safe ascent to the surface. Now, I think you'll agree with me that I've developed the absolute foolproof and it's a countermeasure I can recommend. Right, back to Ascents. So, to wrap this up, 11 UK fatalities, which is a little bit lower, small numbers, so we can't, it's an average year, sadly, but slightly below average. The older diver fatalities still continue to feature. We are getting older. You need to think a bit more about health, fitness, all that good stuff. IPO, I think, has always been with us, but I think now we need to be more aware of it. And I think that there are, as I say, I found, without looking hard, 200 incidents just popped straight out the database. 10% of those were fatalities. So it's not necessarily a fatal issue, but it is an issue that affects divers. Please take that message away. Please be aware of this issue and make others aware of it. And the response is safely get out the water as quickly as you can. So you should be alert to symptoms and so forth. The number of incidents has been falling. I think it's now settling around about 230 a year. The temporal profile, this reduced amount of incidents early on in the diving season is still there. It has been there for 3 years. I suspect it's going to be now the new pattern. People are delaying their diving till later on in the year in the UK, it seems. And then lastly, just making the point that DCI seems to have gone up. My expectation is, I hope next year we'll see that actually that was just a perturbation and we're back to a normal picture. That's it.